Hi, I'm Emily from emilylearning.com. In this video, I'll be going through the Cambridge iGCSE 2022 May-June paper. This is paper 1, so this is for students who are taking the core paper. So let's go through this paper together. So in question 1, okay, we are told diagrams of the 3 states of matter for carbon dioxide are shown. Which 2 diagrams show the states of matter before and after sublimation of carbon dioxide? So to do this question, we need to know what is sublimation. So what is sublimation? Sublimation is basically a change in state from solid to gas. Okay, so we know that it is from solid to gas for sublimation. Next, we know that this is a liquid, this is a gas, this is a liquid, and this is a solid, because in the gas, the particles are the most far apart, followed by liquid and then a solid. So because sublimation is from a solid to a gas, so therefore it will be from picture 3 to picture 1. So the answer for question 1 is C. Moving on to question 2. A student measures the time taken for 2 grams of magnesium to dissolve in 50 cm³ of dilute sulfuric acid. Which apparatus is essential to complete the experiment? So in other words, they want to find what is the time taken for 2 grams of magnesium to dissolve in 50 cm³ of sulfuric acid, and we're interested in the time. So in order to measure the time, we need a stop clock. In order to measure 2 grams of magnesium, we need a balance. Okay, and we need to measure 50 cm³ of dilute sulfuric acid. So to measure volume of liquid, we need a measuring cylinder. So in order to conduct this experiment, we need 3 items: stop clock, measuring cylinder, and the balance. So it is 1, 2, and 4. So the answer is A. Moving on to question 3, which method is used to separate a solid of the following liquids? So if you take a mixture of the following liquids. So now if you were to look at all these liquids here, what they differ is by boiling point. And they are all alcohols. So we know they are miscible liquids, so they will dissolve in each other. Okay, so if you want to separate miscible liquids with different boiling point, then the method would be fractional distillation. So the answer is D. Moving on to question 4, which substance should be pure for the intended use? So when we are looking at pure substance, okay, we will want a drug. A drug for curing a disease must be pure. If there's impurities, it might result in side effects and even death. Okay, limestone for iron extraction, not necessary. Petroleum is already a mixture, so it's already not pure. Water for washing a car, not essential. Even if it is rainwater, we can also wash the car. And rainwater is basically a mixture containing water and other dissolved gas, right? So the answer for 4 is A. We need something to be very pure, particularly when we want to consume them, for example, for drugs, for food, and so on. Moving on to question 5, which rule identifies an alloy, a pure metal, and a non-metal? So an alloy, brass is an alloy. Okay, so we have either A or B. Copper is a pure metal. Okay, so to find pure metals, just look at your periodic table under the metals portion. So your periodic table, those that are here are metals, those that are here are non-metals. Okay, so if the name exists in the periodic table, it is pure. Okay, so copper is a pure metal. So we have this, so it's B. Okay, then non-metal we have carbon. So the answer for question 5 is basically B. Moving on to question 6, information about the structures of 3 atoms X, Y, and Z is shown. Which statement about atoms X, Y, and Z are true? So we know that X, Y, and Z have the same proton number but different nucleon number. In other words, nucleon number is equals to protons plus neutrons. So if something has the same number of proton but different number of proton plus neutron, that means it has different number of neutrons. So in other words, these are isotopes of the same element. Okay, so they are isotopes of the same element. Next, we know that they are all atoms. So what is an atom? An atom has a charge of 0 because the number of protons is equal to the number of electrons. So if X, Y, Z has 1 proton, they will also have 1 electrons each in each of the atoms. So in other words, they contain the same number of electrons, correct? They contain the same number of neutrons? No. So for X, the number of neutrons is equal to 1 minus 1, which is 0. For Y, the number of neutrons is 1. And for Z, the number of neutrons is 2. So they do not contain the same number of neutrons. They are not the same. 4, they contain 1 occupied electron shell. So because there is only 1 electron, so the electron will be inside the first shell, which can fill up to 2 electrons. So yes, they all contain 1 occupied electron shell. So the answer is 1, 2, and 4. So the answer for 6 is A. Okay, next let's look at it. What happens to an atom when it becomes an ion with a charge of +1? So when something becomes positively charged, it means that it loses electrons. Okay, protons, neutrons will never be removed from an atom or ion. Okay, something becomes charged only due to the movement of electrons. So if it becomes positively charged, it means that it loses an electron, so that it has 1 more proton than electron. So 7's answer is C. Moving on to question 8. The relative atomic mass of an element is determined by comparing the mass of one atom of the element with the mass of one atom of element Q. So what is Q? So this question requires us to know the definition of the relative atomic mass. So what is the definition of the relative atomic mass of an element? Well, the relative atomic mass of an element is the relative mass of one atom of that element, okay, to 1/12 the mass of one atom of carbon-12. So this element Q here is basically carbon, okay, and specifically carbon-12. So 8 is A, and it's basically from definition. Next, which equation for the decomposition of calcium nitrate is correct? So calcium nitrate will undergo decomposition to form NO2 and O2 as well as calcium oxide. Okay, so all of them give us the correct product. So basically what we need to check is the formula. So let's start off by checking the formula. Okay, so calcium nitrate is CaNO3 2, right? So this is its formula. So all of them have this correct formula. So we do not need to check the formula. Okay, because we know that calcium nitrate is Ca bracket NO3 2, calcium oxide is CaO, nitrogen dioxide is NO2, oxygen is O2. So basically this question, okay, it gives all the correct formula of the starting material and the ending product. So in other words, right, what we need to check is the balancing of the equation. So 1 calcium here, let's look at A first. 1 calcium, 1 calcium. All right. 2 nitrogen, 1 nitrogen. So A is out. Let's take a look at this. 1 calcium, 1 calcium. 2 nitrogen because there's a NO3 bracket 2, so there's 2 nitrogen. 2 nitrogen here, 2 nitrogen here. 6 oxygen here in B because 3 times 2, so 6 oxygen. Let's look at this. There's 1 oxygen here, 4 oxygen here because 2 times 2 is 4. Then plus another 2 plus another 1 is 7 oxygen, but there's only 6 oxygen on the reactant side, so this is wrong. Moving on to C, so you have 2 calcium, 2 calcium, all right. Next, let's check nitrogen. 2 times 2, so 4 nitrogen here because there's a 2 here and there's another 2 here. So 2 times 2 is 4, 4 nitrogen on the reactant side, 2 nitrogens on the product side. So this is out already. Okay, now let's move on to D. So I have 2 calcium, great. 2 times 2, so 4 nitrogen, great. I have 6 times 2, 3 times 2 is 6, 6 times 2 is 12, so I have 12 oxygen. So let's check, there's 2 oxygen here, 4 times 2, 8 oxygen here, and another 2 oxygen here. So 2 plus 8 plus 2 is 12, so you have the same number of oxygen in the reactant and the product side. So for number 9, the answer is D. Number 10, the diagram shows the electrolysis of concentrated hydrochloric acid and concentrated aqueous sodium hydroxide using carbon electrodes. At which electrode is hydrogen produced? Okay, so now let's take a look at this. So, if you were to look at concentrated HCl, we know that it has both H plus, Cl minus, as well as OH minus from water. Okay, so because there is only one cation, so at the cathode, which is here, okay, only H plus will be discharged to form hydrogen gas. So for this electrolyte, this is electrolyte 2, okay, we will have hydrogen being produced. Next, let's look at sodium chloride. So concentrated aqueous sodium chloride, so it will contain Na plus and Cl minus, as well as aqueous, so you have water. So water, you will contribute H plus and OH minus. Okay, so now these two will migrate to electrolyte 4, which is negatively charged because opposite charges attract. Okay, and because hydrogen is lower down in the reactivity series, it will be preferentially discharged. So you'll have hydrogen being evolved here. So in electrolyte 4, you also have hydrogen gas being discharged. So for question 10, the answer is electrolyte 2 and electrolyte 4, which is D. So the answer for 10 is D. Moving on to 11, overhead power cables made from steel cord aluminium are used to carry electricity over long distance. Which property of steel cord aluminium make it suitable for use in power cables? So basically they are asking us why we use aluminium, right? Okay, so the main reason is because aluminium has a low density. Okay, so if you want to use overhead power cables, okay, so these are those that hang on top. Okay, you do need them to be light. Okay, if not, you will need a lot of support for it. Okay, so therefore the reason why we use steel cord aluminium is because aluminium has a low density. So the answer is A. Right. Next, let's move on to 12. Which role identifies a chemical change and a physical change? So chemical change, that means there is a change in the chemicals. So in terms of, for example, if you look at calcium carbonate, it forms calcium oxide. Chemically, it has changed. You form a different compound. So therefore, it is a chemical change. For physical change, is usually a change in state from solid to liquid, or a change in color and so on, without a change in the chemical composition of the material. So boiling, melting, freezing, condensation, all these consists of physical change. Okay, evaporation is also a physical change from a liquid to a vapor state. So in other words, physical change, you have evaporation as well as dissolving. So ethanol, when you dissolve in water, it is still ethanol plus water, but then now they are mixed together, but there's no change. You still have ethanol and water. If you want to burn something, once you burn ethanol is CH3, CH2OH. If you were to burn it, it will become carbon dioxide and water, right? Okay, so because it becomes carbon dioxide and water, there's a chemical change. Okay, and because there is a chemical change, okay, burning is considered a chemical change because you change the chemical composition. It's no longer CH3, CH2OH. It is CO2 and H2O. Okay, so burning is not. So burning is considered a chemical change. Okay, boiling, dissolving, and evaporation are physical change because you do not change the composition or the chemical composition of ethanol. It's still CH3, CH2OH. Okay, so the answer for 12 is B. Moving on to question 13, the equation for the reaction when hydrogen is used as a fuel is shown here. So we have this equation that is given to us. Which statement about this reaction is true? So this H2 plus O2, you form H2O, and it's going to be used as a fuel. So if something is going to be used as a fuel, what must it do? It must give out energy, right? Give out energy. If it doesn't give out energy, then what's the point of using it as a fuel, right? So if something is used as a fuel, straight away, remember it will give out energy. Okay, so energy is given out, so temperature of the surrounding decreases, wrong. So if energy is given out, temperature of the surrounding will increase because the heat energy now goes to the surrounding. So energy is taken in is also wrong because energy is given out. Okay, So reaction is endothermic, wrong, because energy is given out, so it's an exothermic reaction and the temperature increases. So the answer for 13 is D. Which fuel releases carbon dioxide when burned? So if it releases carbon dioxide, then it must contain carbon. So gasoline contains carbon, so it will give CO2 when burned. Hydrogen only contains H2. So when you burn hydrogen, you'll get water only. So this equation in the previous question, H2 plus O2, you get H2O, is basically what happens when hydrogen is burned. Okay, so no, hydrogen will not give carbon dioxide when burned. Methane, yes, it contains carbon, so when burned, you'll give carbon dioxide. So 1 and 3 is the answer. So the answer for 14 is B. Next, moving on to question 15. So water is added to anhydrous copper 2 sulfate. So anhydrous simply means that there is no water of crystallization being attached to it. So and when there's no water of crystallization attached to it, basically what color it is white. Okay, when it becomes hydrated, it becomes blue. Okay, so this one is just memorization. Okay, or if you do experiments often enough, you'll notice that water copper 2 sulfate, when it is anhydrous, it is white. Once you put it on the table and the humidity is high, you turn blue very quickly. Okay, so you have anhydrous, so add water to anhydrous copper 2 sulfate, so you turn from white to blue. So it is white to blue, turn white to blue. So in other words, it's either A or B because it should turn blue. Okay, next, this reaction is exothermic. So when you add water to copper 2 sulfate, it is an exothermic reaction. So if it's an exothermic reaction, the solution gets hotter. So the answer is B. Okay, let's move on to question 16. Excess magnesium ribbon is reacted with a fixed volume of hydrochloric acid. So this is in excess. That means if I were to add more magnesium later on, I will not increase the amount of hydrogen gas that is being evolved. Okay, but if I were to add more hydrochloric acid, which is the limiting reagent, I'll have more gas being evolved. Okay, and the volume of gas given off over time is measured. The results of two different experiments are shown. So you notice for reaction 1 and reaction 2, there is different volumes of gas being produced. Okay, so if there are different volume of gas produced, what it suggests is I actually change the amount of hydrochloric acid used, because hydrochloric acid is the limiting reagent. So by changing the amount of hydrochloric acid used, or by increasing it, I'll have more hydrogen gas being produced. But if I change the amount of excess, so if I use more or less magnesium, nothing, I will not increase or decrease the volume. Okay, reason is because it's in excess. Okay, so the same amount still reacts. Okay, so now coming back to here. So now what can we say about reaction 1 and reaction 2? So if you look at reaction 1, the initial gradient is steeper than that of reaction 2. So I know that reaction 1 has a faster initial rate than reaction 2. I also know that reaction 1 has more HCl used, okay, because more gas is produced, so that means you have more limiting reagent being used. Alright, so now, which statement explains the difference between the result of two experiments? Reaction 1 uses a catalyst. Yes, one, if you use a catalyst, it will be faster, but that does not explain why more hydrogen is being produced. Okay, so therefore this is not the answer, because you need two things to happen: faster rate and also more hydrogen being produced. So in order to have more hydrogen being produced, you need more of the limiting reagent, which in this case is hydrochloric acid being used. Okay, the acid used is twice as concentrated in reaction 1 possible. The magnesium ribbon is in smaller pieces in reaction 2. No. Okay, smaller pieces, faster rate of reaction, but in reaction 2, the rate is slower. Okay, and if you use smaller pieces for the same amount of magnesium, you will not increase the volume of gas produced. So C is also out. The temperature is higher. No. Okay, reaction 2 is slower, has a slower initial rate. So that means it, if you have a higher temperature, the rate should be faster. So this doesn't explain the curve. Okay, what's more, it also doesn't explain why there's less hydrogen being produced. So the answer for 16 should be B. Okay, because only B will result in a faster initial rate of reaction for reaction 1, and also more hydrogen being produced. Alright, Okay, now moving on to 17. Which products are formed when magnesium hydroxide reacts with hydrochloric acid? So you have magnesium hydroxide. So most metal hydroxides and oxides are bases. Okay, there are some exceptions like your lead 2 oxide, your zinc oxide, your aluminum oxide, they are amphoteric, but apart from that, the rest are all basic. Okay, so if you have a basic oxide plus hydrochloric acid, so you have a base plus acid, you have salt and water. So the salt form will be magnesium chloride and water. Okay, so you have magnesium chloride and water being produced, so the answer should be D. Number 18, the oxides of two elements X and Y are separately dissolved in water and the pH of the solution are tested. So when you dissolve oxide X in water, you have a pH of 1. So it tells you that X is an acidic oxide. Okay, oxide of Y, when it dissolves, you have a pH of 13, which is a high pH. So we know that it is a basic oxide. Okay, so in other words, we know that X is acidic, Y is basic, X is acidic, Y is basic. Okay, and acidic oxides are usually non-metal oxides. So X is non-metal. Basic oxides are usually metallic oxides. So Y is metal. So the answer is B. Next, an acid is neutralized by adding an excess of insoluble solid base. A soluble salt is formed. So this is basically forming a soluble salt from an insoluble starting starting material. So once you form the soluble salt, how do you obtain the pure salt? Well, you must first filter the solution to remove the insoluble solid base. Okay, so you first filter it. So once you have filtered it, now you have the soluble salt in a solution. Okay. So how do you obtain the salt from its solution? Well, you must first evaporate some of the water to get a hot saturated solution, and once it is saturated, then the next thing you need to do is you need to crystallize to obtain the salt. So the answer is D. Okay, moving on to question 20. So 3 separate samples of aqueous compound T are tested. The results are shown. What is T? So let's take a look. So I acidify with dilute nitric acid, then add barium nitrate. So this is basically testing for sulfate. Okay, if you get a white PBT, you know that sulfate is present. Add aqueous ammonia, add aqueous sodium hydroxide. This one is basically to test for cations. So you get a white PBT soluble in excess and a white TBT soluble in excess ammonia as well as sodium hydroxide. So it must be zinc because Zn2 plus, okay, will react with both aqueous ammonia and aqueous sodium hydroxide to give a white precipitate, which are soluble in excess ammonia or sodium hydroxide. So the answer should be zinc sulfate. So the answer is D. Okay, next let's move on to question 21. So in question 21, you are given part of the periodic table. So this is the periodic table, and which element is a metal? So if we have a periodic table, let me draw in the staircase, which is here. Okay, anything that is on the left hand side of this stairs are metals. Anything on the right hand side are non-metals. And the one that is dangling here is hydrogen, and hydrogen is basically a non-metal. So the only metal is basically C. Okay. Moving on to 22. So the elements sodium to argon form period 3 of the periodic table. Which row describes the trend across period 3 from left to right? So this is period 1 to, this is period 1, 2, 3. So this is period 3. Okay, so you can refer to your periodic table. This is period 3. So if you go from left to right, what happens is you go from metals to non-metals. As you go from left to right, because they are in the same period, they have the same number of shells filled with electrons, but the number of electrons in the outermost shell will increase. So if you are in group 1, you have 1 valence electrons or 1 electron in the outer shell. Group 2, you have 2 electrons in the outer shell. Group 3, you have 3 electrons in the outer shell. Group 4, you have 4 electrons in the outer shell, and so on. So the number of outer shell electrons will increase from left to right. So it's either C or D now. Metallic character will decrease because here is metal, here is non-metal. So it decreased. Then the group number will increase. So the answer for 22 is basically C. Moving on to 23, lithium, sodium, and potassium are elements in group 1 of the periodic table. And if you were to check your group 1 periodic table, lithium is at the top, followed by sodium is beneath it, and then potassium is beneath sodium. Okay, so lithium, sodium, potassium means going down the group. Okay, and they are all in group 1. So which statement about these elements is correct? Lithium has the highest melting point and the lowest density. So what do we know about the group 1? So as we go down the group for metals or for group 1, the melting point decreases, the density will increase. Okay, so yes, lithium has the highest melting point and lowest density. So A is correct. So this is wrong. Okay. Lithium has the highest density. No, it has the lowest density and the most violent reaction with water. Not true. As you go down group 1, it becomes more reactive. So lithium is the least reactive of all group 1 metals. Potassium has the highest melting point and the highest density. Not true. It has the lowest melting point of the 3 of them, but it has the highest density of the 3. So this is correct. This is wrong. So this is wrong. Potassium has the lowest melting point, correct, of the 3 of them, and the least violent reaction with water. Not true. It has the most violent reaction because it is lower down in the periodic table, or it is lower down in group 1. So the lower it is in the group, the more readily it loses electrons. So the more readily it reacts. Okay, so it's more violent reaction with water. So the answer is A. Moving on to 24, which statement describes a transition element? So a transition element can act as catalyst, and some of its compounds can also act as catalyst. Yes, it is true. Transition elements and its compounds form good catalysts. It forms white compounds with sulfur, oxygen, chlorine, and bromine. Not necessarily true, because transition elements, they often form colored compounds. All right. It has a low density. No, they have high density. So if they have a high density, they will sink in water. It is a very poor conductor of electricity. Wrong. Transition elements, they are metals. Metals are good conductor of electricity. So the answer for 24 is A. Alright, moving on to question 25. Which diagram represents the arrangement of the outer shell electrons of a noble gas? So for a noble gas, okay, except for the first period where it has 2 valence electrons, the rest will have 8 valence electrons. So because A only has 1 shell filled with electrons, it has 2 electrons, okay, which is helium. So this is correct. Then as long as you have more than 1 shell filled with electrons, the outermost shell must have 8 electrons. Here only have 4, so this is out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here only have 5, C is out. D has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No, it's wrong. So only A represents noble gas. Okay, so remember, for noble gas, first period, which is helium, has 2 valence electrons. The rest will have 8 valence electrons in their outermost shell. 8 electrons in their outermost shell. Now moving on to question 26, which statement about the general properties of metals are correct? So metals, they are good conductors of heat and electricity, correct. They have low melting and boiling point, not true. They react with dilute acid to form salt and water, no. In general, metals react with acid to form salt and hydrogen. Okay, it is the metal hydroxides or oxides that form salt and water. So 3 is wrong. Metals react with oxygen to form basic oxides. Yes, it's true. In general, they form basic oxides. So 1 and 4 are correct. So 26 is B. Moving on to question 27, reactions of 3 metals and their oxides are shown. What is the order of reactivity of these metals from most reactive to least reactive? Okay, so now let's take a look. The more reactive the metal, the more readily it reacts with acid. So 1 and 2 is more reactive than 3 because 3 doesn't react with acid. That means it's below hydrogen in the reactivity series. Metal 1 and 2 are above hydrogen in the reactivity series. Okay, so 3 is the least reactive. So most reactive to least reactive, 3 will be the least reactive. So I know my answer is either A or C. Now, let's take a look at it. Heat metal oxide with carbon. So the less reactive the metal, the more readily it gets reduced when heating with reducing agents such as carbon. So since 1 undergoes this reduction reaction but not 2, we know that 1 is less reactive than 2. So 2 is the most reactive. So in other words, the answer is C. Moving on to question 28, which uses of metal shown are correct? So aluminium, they are used in aircraft bodies. That's correct because of their low density. Okay, they are also used in food containers because they are corrosion resistant. Stainless steels, they are used, they do not rust, okay? So they are used in cutlery. They are not used in car bodies. Too expensive because you need a big area. Stainless steel you usually use for small items. So in other words, D is correct. Okay. So basically this is just memorizing the uses of the different type of metals. Moving on to question 29, which statement about the reaction in the blast furnace is correct? So in the blast furnace, carbon react with oxygen and heats the furnace. Yes, because when carbon from coke reacts with oxygen, okay, it produces heat because the reaction is exothermic and it heats the furnace. So this is correct. Carbon monoxide removes silicon dioxide impurity forming slag. No, it is calcium oxide that reacts with silicon dioxide to form slag. So this is wrong. Iron 3 oxide is oxidized to iron. So if iron 3 oxide forms iron, this is reduction because it loses oxygen, so it's not oxidized. Limestone reduces iron 3 oxide to iron. No, limestone is not a reducing agent. In this case, it is carbon as well as your carbon monoxide that reduces iron 3 oxide to form iron. So this is wrong. So the answer to 29 is A. Iron rusts when exposed to air. Which two substances in air causes iron to rust? So basically, what causes rust? Well, you need water as well as oxygen. So the answer is C. Okay, moving to question 31. Fertilizers are used to provide 3 elements needed for growth. So these 3 elements are NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So which 2 compounds would give fertilizer containing all 3 elements? So basically, we need the 2 compounds to contain N, P, and K. So for A, you have N, you have no P, you have no K, so out. For B, you have N, you have P, but you have no K, out. For C, you have K, N, N, but no P, so it's out. For D, you have K, N, and P, so the answer is D. Which process produces methane? So basically, this one is just memorizing which process produces methane. So it is the decomposition of vegetation that gives up methane. So the answer is B. Moving on to question 33, which statement about sulfur dioxide is correct? So sulfur dioxide decolorizes acidified potassium manganate 7. Yes, it is true. Okay, so this is true. This one is under the chapter on your redox reactions. So sulfur dioxide can decolorize potassium manganate. Okay, then sulfur dioxide forms acid when reacts with carbonates. No. Okay, sulfur dioxide is already an acidic gas, so it will not react with carbonates. Correct? Yeah. So sulfur dioxide forms acid when reacts with carbonate. No, it forms a salt. Okay, next, sulfur dioxide is used as a bleach. Yes, it is true. Sulfur dioxide is used to treat acidic soil. No, acid plus acid makes the soil even more acidic, so it's wrong. So 1 and 3 is the answer, so we have A. Question 34, what are the products when limestone, which is calcium carbonate, is heated strongly? So when calcium carbonate is heated strongly, we will form calcium oxide and carbon dioxide. So it is C. Alright, moving on to 35, in which list are the compounds in the same homologous series? So if they have the same homologous series, they differ by a CH2 group. They have the same functional group. Okay, so we know that CH4 is an alkane. C2H4, if you look at this, this C2H4 will have one more carbon than this CH4, right? So are they in the same homologous series? No, because if you want to have two carbon, it should be C2H6. C2H4 is an alkene. Okay, so it is not. CH4 is an alkane. C3H8 is also an alkane. They follow CnH2n plus 2. Okay, but not C2H4. So one is not in the same homologous series because of C2H4, which is an alkene, whereas CH4 and C3H8 are alkanes. Okay, next, OH, OH, OH. Very likely they look like they are in the alcohol group. So let's check whether they differ by CH2 group. Okay, so CH3 plus 1 carbon, it becomes C2, plus 2 hydrogen, it becomes H5. Yeah, correct. Next, I add CH2 to C2H5, I get C3H7. Oh, so correct. So 2, they are all in the same homologous series. They are the alcohols. Next, I have 3. I have the functional group COOH, but this one I have OH, this one I have OH. So 2 alcohols, 1 carboxylic acid, they don't have the same functional group. So in other words, not all of them belong to the same homologous series. So the answer is only C. Only all 3 molecules in 2 belongs in the same homologous series. Now, moving on to question 36, which row about aqueous ethanoic acid and dilute hydrochloric acid is correct? So, both contains carbon, no. Ethanoic acid is CH3COOH. So, yes, ethanoic acid contains carbon, but hydrochloric acid is HCl. So, no C at all. So, they do not both contains carbon. So, A and B is out already. So, we only need to check C and D. Okay, next, both contain hydrogen, yes. So ethanoic acid has H, so that's HCl. So yes, it's correct. So the answer is C. Okay, both react with carbonates. Yes, all acids will react with carbonates to give carbon dioxide, salt, and water. So the answer for 36 is C. Some properties of colorless liquids are listed. So let's take a look at some properties of the colorless liquid. Okay. So it boils at 65 degrees Celsius, alright, it boils at 65 degrees Celsius. When added to water, 2 layers form which do not mix. That means it's insoluble in water. It does not react with sodium carbonate, so it's not an acid. It has no effect on bromine water, so in other words, it's not an alkene. Okay, so next, now we know that it's not an alkene, so I'll eliminate the alkene. I know that it's not an acid, I'll eliminate it. Insoluble in water, so it's not an alcohol because ethanol is soluble in water. So the answer is basically hexane. Okay, and we also know that hexane is a liquid at room temperature. Okay, so the answer is B. Moving on to question 38. Okay, so in question 28, I have a molecule, compound P, contains 2 carbons and 4 hydrogen atoms. So it is C2H4. Okay, so if you have C2H4, what is this? It is ethene. Okay, and the MR is equals to 2 times 12 because the AR of carbon is 12 plus 4 hydrogen. Okay, the relative atomic mass of each hydrogen is 1. So total is 28. So the MR of C2H4 is equals to 28. Okay, so it's either C or D. And because it is ethene and alkene, alkene reacts with aqueous bromine. So the answer is C. So for 38, the answer is C. Let's move on to question 39. So the equation representing the reaction of hydrocarbon with water is shown. So hydrocarbon plus water in the presence of a catalyst, you form alcohol. So what are the values of X and Y? So this one you have learned. So what is this reaction? It is basically the hydration of alkenes to form alcohols. Okay, so this one needs to be an alkene. And this one will be an alcohol. Okay, and this is an addition reaction, right? So in other words, right, for the addition reaction, they add up to form this. So if we look at this, this alcohol has a total of 6 hydrogen. So I minus 2 hydrogen from the alcohol. I know that Y here is basically 4. So Y is equals to 4. So because 4 hydrogen here plus 2 hydrogen here is 6 hydrogens, and there are 6 hydrogens here. Alright, so I know that H is 4, so it's this. Okay, now I know that this is an alkene. So the general formula of alkene is CnH2n. So now if 2n is equals to 4, that means n is equals to 2. So in other words, x is equals to 2. So the answer for this question is C. Finally, let's look at question 40. Many molecules of J join together in reaction R to form a long chain molecule. So small molecules join together to form a long chain molecule. So in other words, this is polymerization. Okay. And K is the only product. So that means you do not have elimination of small molecules. So this is an addition polymerization. So K is an addition polymer. Okay, so the reaction R is addition reaction. J, which is the small molecule, is called the monomer, and K, which is the large molecule, is called the polymer.